Emily Dickinson is one of the most popular American poets of the 19th century. Her poems invite the reader into her mind, and one can understand a little about what her life was like by analyzing her poetry. Emily Dickinson was born on December 10, 1830, to a highly Puritan family in Amherst, Massachusetts. She attended Amherst Academy from 1840 until 1847 and then studied at Mount Holyoke Female Seminary for 1 year. From about the year 1847 until her death in 1886 at 55 years old, Dickinson remained isolated in her home. That's about 39 years of isolation. Reports from Dickinson and others state that Dickinson left her house very seldom and only left her town of Amherst 3 times since she began her reclusion from society. There are many hypotheses as to why she isolated herself, such as to follow gender roles set forth in her time, or because she was depressed and didn't very much enjoy the company of other people, but nobody ultimately knows the entire truth. However, one hypothesis of merit is written by Shira Wolowski, professor of English and Literature at Hebrew University, Israel. She writes in her book, Poetry and Public Discourse in 19th Century America, that Dickinson's work, quote, reflects and enacts the cultural concerns and challenges of the world in which she lived. Elizabeth Petrino states in the Emily Dickinson Journal that Dickinson responds to those social challenges by composing lyric poetry that was untraditional during her time in an effort to dispute social and political values. One can see how she sets her own social boundaries by analyzing her poetry. In her poem, The Soul Selects Her Own Society, she says, quote, "The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door," end quote. This can be interpreted that she is closing the door to her room, secluding herself from society. She also uses the words unmoved and pausing, and ends her poem by saying, "Then close the valves of her attention, like stone." All of these demonstrate a clear use of imagery to depict her lying in her bed motionless, enjoying her own society of herself and her own company with her notepad. In the article Actualizing Identity, Self-Actualization in Emily Dickinson's Poetry by Nassim Zahedi Zoost, Zoost analyzes several of Dickinson's poems in an attempt to get into the mind of Dickinson and understand her thoughts and emotions. Zoost analyzes both The Soul Selects Her Own Society and Hope is the Thing with Feathers, which will be discussed later, and suggests that these poems are both clear examples of Dickinson's spiritual journey and self-actualization. He says that these poems are very clearly, quote, marked by self-actualization, and it emphasizes the soul's power that makes her own rule and has no boundary for her, end quote. She also discusses her reclusion in her poem, I Had Been Hungry All the Years. She expresses her hunger to be part of society when she says, I had been hungry all the years, my noon had come to dine. But she also explains how scared she was to be part of society as she writes, I trembling drew the table near, and myself felt ill and odd. She lived her life hungry to be part of society and regretted being too scared to talk to others for a long time. In the end, however, a different interpretation can be made about Emily Dickinson's hunger. She says, nor was I hungry, so I found. That hunger was a way of persons outside windows the entering takes away. Dickinson is implying that she is okay with being socially isolated because it gives her time to live in her own world with her pen and paper and discover her identity. She also says, 'Twas so unlike the crumb the birds and I had often shared in nature's dining room. More on this later. Emily Dickinson was also very in tune with nature and connecting nature with her soul. In her poem, A Bird Came Down the Walk, number 359, Dickinson talks about her connection with nature as she secretly observes a bird walking down the path from her window. The bird is described in a meek manner, a fragile, delicate bird who, quote, walked sidewise to the wall to let a beetle pass. She describes him as cautious when she goes up to offer the bird a crumb. The bird gets scared and flies away and does not eat the crumb. A connection can be hypothesized between the bird and Emily Dickinson herself. Because Emily Dickinson is so in tune with nature, as seen throughout her poems, she may be able to see a little bit of herself in the animals that she is watching. It makes sense here that Dickinson is in fact the bird, because the bird is so shy and careful as Dickinson would be while she is recluded in her home. The bird is essentially being personified into the soul of Emily Dickinson. Despite being recluded from society, Emily Dickinson is still able to find positive meaning in her social isolation. This can be found in her poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers. In this poem, Dickinson talks about hope and describes it as an animal with feathers. One can make a connection to the bird from A Bird Came Down the Walk, previously stated earlier. She suggests that her hope is very strong when she says, "Sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm." The truest sign of a connection can be found when she finishes the poem by saying, quote, "Yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me." Emily Dickinson mentions this crumb in 3 out of the 4 poems analyzed today. It is also mentioned in some of her other poems as well. This crumb can be interpreted as a symbol of Emily Dickinson's life. In A Bird Came Down the Walk, she offers the bird the crumb. She is essentially offering herself to us with this crumb. She is delicately inviting us into her world, but yet the bird flies away. Again, the crumb is mentioned in I Had Been Hungry All the Years, as she is hungry to eat the crumb that she shared with the bird in nature's dining room, but she doesn't. She is tempted to give in and be a part of society, but she would be taking away the purpose of her life and taking away the opportunity to enter her world. Finally, the crumb is brought up again in Hope is the Thing with Feathers. Once she has found peace with herself, she invites us into her world. She says that we never asked a crumb of her. Nobody ever asked to go into her mind, but she is instead inviting us to enter and figure out what her life was like. The crumb is essentially a gateway into her imagination, into her life, her soul, her emotions, her. She found comfort in being separated from society because it gave her time to find out who she is. In this crazy time of the coronavirus pandemic and social isolation, it is important that we take the time to understand who we really are. Poetry was Emily Dickinson's pathway from her heart to the outside world, and she is challenging us to figure out what will take us on the path to find out our identity and what connects us to the outside world.